When the Christians took Jerusalem, they butchered every Muslim in the walls of the city.
I am not those men. I am Salahuddin. Salahuddin.
Then, under those terms, I surrender Jerusalem to you.
Salam alaikum.
And peace be with you too. What is Jerusalem worth?
Nothing.
Everything. I think Islam hates us.
They have done nothing except wreak havoc and terror for our faith and our religion.
Professed values of the Western countries, democracy and constitutional and human rights, at least they should speak about this.
And it's like, I feel like religion just is making it worse. They say they believe in God, but I think they're just anxious.
Before we talk about politics, let's look at the fundamental things.
That when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad.
And it requires people with guts to follow God in an era that everyone does whatever is right in their eyes.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently? Or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah Initiative, conversation without compromise.
Hi, welcome to Christ and Caliphate. Today we are doing a movie review on the movie Kingdom of Heaven, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Orlando Bloom, set during the Crusades, and it came out in 2005.
Yes. So why are we reviewing a 19-year-old movie today?
Yeah.
Because it must be like Orlando Bloom's birthday or something.
Well, it's kind of a movie that people ask us a lot about, and because we facilitate friendship and worldview conversations between Christians and Muslims, people often ask our opinion on this movie. And we also just did a Crusades episode as well.
Right.
And I think for a lot of people, this fills the void of the Crusades in their imagination. Right. And everybody's sort of talking about, yeah, we need to have another Crusade again right now. Okay, not everybody. Certain corners of the internet are saying we need to have another Crusade right now.
Wow. That's disturbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially after watching the movie, right? Because it was so bloody. It was like so many people getting split in half or burned alive.
Okay, well, let's get into it. What do we think of the movie?
I thought it was, I saw it before, years ago, and I just kind of tuned out a little bit in the movie. It got kind of boring, a lot of dialogue and everything else like that. But we watched the director's cut, and it was fantastic. It's like so much development in between of the characters and what was actually going on there. And Ridley Scott is just great. Like, he just does great movies. I've been a fan of his since like the Alien movies,
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was visually awesome. It felt like watching a movie based on a history book or a novel, like movies that follow, I don't know, like it's just one of those epics kind of historical movies. So I liked it in that regard.
To play devil's advocate here, and Ridley Scott making great movies, the last one I saw he made was Napoleon.
I didn't watch it.
It was boring.
It was bad, yeah.
But maybe there's a somehow longer version which makes it better.
Right.
Like, this is an hour longer than
Sure.
the theatrical cut, and it's somehow like way more interesting.
Did he do Exodus, God and Kings too?
Oh yeah.
That was me.
Well, actually,
Not so good.
That brings us to an interesting theme, because this is a movie about a religious war made by a guy who is essentially a secular humanist.
Right.
He's not religious himself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say that this movie did a good job of elevating in the context of the movie, Orlando Bloom's character, Balaam? No, how do you say his name?
Balian.
Balian represents like the secular humanist hero.
Essentially.
Yeah. Which, for a secular humanist hero, it was good.
He was a good character, for sure.
I'm a fan. Yeah.
I think they did not put Christianity in the best light, and they made Islam seem more noble, right?
I enjoyed that.
I mean,
I enjoyed
it
that.
was it's just it's not a for me it wasn't an enjoy or joy thing. I just like to see where's the bias, right? Like where's the bias in what the writer's doing. But I would say this though, there was a lot of it's like religion versus right action.
Yes.
Right. There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
And that was like the admirable qualities of the good characters.
Which is the admirable quality of like humanists and secular humanists. And
yeah. Well, I mean, even the religious people, you know, some of them, like, what was his father's name?
Liam Neeson.
He had a specific set of skills in being a good guy. And you know, I think another theme that they were really exploring, particularly earlier in the movie, that you know just kind of had like a relevance as to how all the characters went up there, was forgiveness, right? Like they had, you know, either blood on their hands or
that was the theme.
yeah, and you know, Orlando Bloom is essentially looking for absolution.
That was okay, which is actually my problem with the film is like the first half of like watching the full film, the director's cut, the first half of the film, literally before like intermission, it's like all about his guilt and his shame. Like he wants to, Orlando Bloom, his character, he wants to go redeem himself, his dead wife, and then like
he killed his half brother.
Yeah, but I mean, and then after the rest of the movie, it seems like that whole motif completely dissipated and had nothing to do. It almost like it felt like two
things
kind
changed.
of separate
Things
movies.
changed. Yeah, I
like
mean,
completely. But it's fine in the art of filmmaking. I'm used to movies that like, you know, you look at. I'm just used to a lot of these kind of epic movies that like start with what they're starting with, and then they like bring it in all the way to the end. Where this one, as far as like character motivation, objectives, stakes, all that, like, whereas this one just kind of like had it here, and then it was like out with that, and like now we're focusing all on like these epic battles, which is cool.
Wow, I mean,
I think that's fine. Also because historically speaking, like if you are looking at this movie from more of like a historical perspective, that's more so like how a history book reads, you know? It's just kind of like this led this guy to go kill this guy, to go betray this guy, and then that's how all this nation or people ended up over here exiled or something. Like that's how a historical narrative kind of moves.
So I actually think there is a little bit more conclusion to that than you're saying there is. It's just a slightly unsatisfying conclusion to it.
Okay.
And what I mean by this is you're basically taking a guy with a hyper-specific medieval Catholic worldview, and his journey is to become basically a pragmatist humanist worldview by the end of the movie.
Sure.
So I think his essential character journey is, he starts off with this understanding that I'm really messed up. But then the more he goes on his journey, he realizes that the whole world and everyone around him and the whole system that he's supposedly supposed to be guilty in the eyes of is probably even more messed up than he is. Yet he has examples of good to look to, both in his father, the King of Jerusalem, and in Jeremy Irons' character as well.
The King of Jerusalem was the guy that wanted Balian to do some sort of coup, no?
Yeah. He wanted him to help execute the sort of main.
So that is interesting because this secular, yes, Catholic become secular humanist guy. The reason that, like, one of the reasons that I think he's stands out as a special character is because most, like, that series of events going from like Catholic, like I don't know, guilty Catholic guy to like looking for redemption to like secular humanist who's going to do the best, who's going to like fight for the best outcome for the most amount of people. Like usually the logic behind that is like the outcome like justifies the means. But this character like specifically was like, I don't want to go that route. I still want to like remain like, I'm not going to let I'm going to do what's right, even if it means a ton. And like, I think Eva Green's character like says that to him, like one day you're gonna wish that you had like done a little bit of evil to like save a lot of people, but he like did it his way and he still saved a lot of people. He saved them, a lot of like the women and children specifically, which is like and yes, all the men died. All the like most of the soldiers died.
A lot of them did.
A lot of them did. There were less
left.
survived. Yeah, and like a lot of the main knights, all those guys died. You know, fighting against the Muslim army. But in his oath, it was specifically like protect the vulnerable populations, and that's what he did. Is like he followed through with that oath. So there was still some nuance to like his character and his oath and like how he delivered that.
Yeah, and I actually think I want to push back on what you said about all the Christians being put in a bad light. While that's true, there are some interesting lines in the movie which do paint some helpful nuance there. And like early on, there's a character saying, you know, I can't see Christ doing anything like this. And then at one point, somebody says, the Pope commands it.
Right.
And then I think it's Jeremy Irons' character says, yes, but Christ does not, and neither does your king. So there is a sense in the movie that the good Christian characters do have a transcendent sense of morality that is actually rooted in the person of Jesus.
It's true, but let's be honest here, because it was really like, if you're looking at it like a scale, you know, and you were looking at the overall portrayer, you know, of course it's all political and, you know, it's trying to be accurate to the time period. Mm-hmm. But the scales are not like even close to balanced, right? So what you're talking about is good. And again, right action, right, versus religion. So it's a bigger contrast in the whole than just Christianity versus Islam or Catholicism.
Oh, it's not even. It's just humanism versus religion.
Yeah, well, I mean,
even though there's like good, solid Christians and there were solid Muslim characters, like including the writer. Anyway, the first guy, I can't remember any of the names. All I can think of is like their equivalents. So like Lupin from Harry Potter.
Yeah, right.
And I just can't think of
solid Christian character.
Yeah.
You've got Alexander Siddig.
You've got Scar. The voice, like the person that voices Scar. So, but you have good, like solid character. I would say like the humanism, the humanity, on both the Muslim characters and some of the Christian characters, like what this movie did was show that despite like their religious adherences. And I think the movie wanted those things to transcend, like what you were saying, like, oh, forgiveness, like you spared my life, I spare your life. Or like, oh, let's make a deal. Yeah, we'll let like all these women and children live. Or like,
I mean, and again, you know, there's like, you have to think about it in terms of honorable characters, I think, right? So there are honorable characters and there are dishonorable characters. Mm-hmm. And that's just normal in life, right? Like, and there are dishonorable characters who are going to say that they're Christians, and there are dishonorable characters that are going to say they're Muslims.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, it just, and that's actually really funny. Jews had like zero part in it.
Jews had no part in it.
It was
they
like
were
like one guy, right?
They're in Jerusalem.
in the background, you know? Yeah. So not like they had to have a major part in it, but it was funny.
Added some nuance.
It was funny, but.
And the villain was two-dimensional, I would say. The, guy that usurps, or like the guy that becomes king after the boy dies.
Yeah.
So, interesting fact here. So you've got let's say two major villains in this movie. One is that guy, the guy with the long hair and the goatee.
Yeah.
And then you've got the knight Raymond, the Templar guy.
Oh my gosh, dude, he was so annoying.
Now, the interesting thing is, while the role of the main villain is kind of overstated, historically he was just sort of incompetent. The Raymond, that character, was actually written about negatively as a barbarian in both Muslim sources and in Christian sources.
Well, okay.
So he was actually universally hated by medieval writers as well.
Oh.
So in some ways he's kind of like plucked straight out of history with that reputation.
Okay.
And the same basically goes for Salahuddin as well. So, for example, in Dante's Inferno, Salahuddin is seen as this honorable non-Christian. And
wait, Dante's Inferno, the book.
The book.
Which isn't historical?
It's not historical, but it tells you something about people's historical attitudes to that. So, about someone's journey into hell. So, in the lowest level of hell, it's kind of like Earth, where people who are not Christians go and dwell. This is not biblical, by the way. But you've got people like Julius Caesar there, and you've got Salahuddin there as well.
Oh.
So people who are not seen as villains from the perspective of history, but who were not Christians either. So a lot of the movie is actually somewhat based in some reality.
That's what I'm saying. It feels like I'm reading it's like a great movie that like taught me a history lesson where I can take most, and which goes back to what you were saying about how a lot of people kind of visualize the Crusades through this movie. Because you can do that with this movie, but obviously with
and
caveats.
That's one thing I think it does really well.
Yeah.
Right. The idea of conflict, of ideologies, religious ideologies coming into conflict to the point of like war. And I thought it did that really well.
There's a lot of characters in this.
Yeah.
A lot of characters.
A lot of characters.
Yeah. And then when you look at it, you're like, wait a minute, that guy was in... Oh, wait, that guy was in Star Trek. Okay.
Yeah.
That guy was in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
That guy was in Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Totally.
So this is written 4 years after 9/11 and after the war in Iraq has started. And I think what it's doing is it's basically tackling the subject of religious extremism and the type of heads that need to prevail in order to bring peace to the world.
Yeah.
And it was a sort of tragedy of that not happening, but with showing the heroism of some people who are able to bring peace in the world.
Yeah.
And the reason I think...
Well, but in the end, you have it's interesting, sorry if I'm interrupting. The end, you say tragedy that it didn't happen in real life, or in both the real life and in the movie. But in the movie you get it really felt like they were trying to do France failed, the French guys failed, here come the English, here come the English Crusaders, picking up the baton and so it's still kind of, it's interesting that at the end it still was not quite content. I don't know. The film seemed not quite oh yes, then the Muslims should be here. It was and there's still going to be another fight. And a lot of it was visually, you had in the battle scenes and the ascension scenes of the rulers, you had all the which was probably one of the most parts that intrigued me the most of the movie, where they're bringing up the flags with the crescent with the moon.
Yeah.
And that was it's almost that was the bigger problem that Orlando's character then is he's no, you can't have these if the flags prevail then it's over, and he goes and gets the flags, but then in the end
it's a big fight scene.
But in the end, they're there.
Strategic piece.
Yeah.
Strategic tower.
But then in the end they're there and the crescent's there, and whatever history stuff that we know about, and then but here come the English at the end, it's not over. So that was interesting.
But part of that,
intriguing.
But part of that is to show his character growth, because they want him to go with them, and he's nah, keep riding, man. I'm not getting involved in this nonsense anymore.
Yeah. But
that's really. How many movies do I have to watch that have a dude who's about as thick as my pinky, like become like a master swordsman and just mow everyone near him down, right? Doesn't matter how big they are or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, with a knife or a sword or something like that.
Yeah.
Every time I saw him fighting, I was like, it's Dune. You know,
Yeah.
it's.
Although there was a throwaway line in the movie where his father asked him if he's fought before, and he says yes, both on.
He was in wars, but I mean, I'm just saying, you know, like there are these hordes attacking. You know, it's like just like the Battle of Helm's Deep, right? And you have he's Aragorn just like mowing people down one at a time. You know, sword.
But there's that. But he was like, okay, here's the other thing. It's like science. Science is important. Science may save us, because then it was like he was using his engineering skills throughout his character.
No, that was good.
To like be smart in battle and like outsmart.
Yeah.
Like that was important. Like if he hadn't done like all.
He was
his
also in Troy,
strategies.
and he didn't play that character in Troy, where he was like the super savvy warrior.
Oh,
He
yeah.
got his butt kicked.
Yeah, anyway, yeah, that was also like, so I really do see the themes of like, you know, what's gonna get us out of these messes are science and humanism, is what I, overall, even though, yes, there is like,
I mean, strategy,
proper depiction.
battle strategy is battle strategy, you know. I think what he was doing as far as science is concerned is just, you know,
like engineering, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, the harpoons that took out the parapets and, you know,
it was cool, yeah.
Siege towers and all that other stuff.
Yeah,
so.
which was good, yeah.
I think part of the reason the Muslims end up looking better in this movie is you just don't have as many Muslim point of view characters. So there's 3 Muslim characters in this movie, really. There's Salahuddin, there's the guy that Balian saves, and then you have the other advisor of Salahuddin, who's the much more aggressive one.
Right.
And so they all have their equivalents on the Christian side. You have the king, who is Salahuddin's equivalent. Both of them are sort of humanistic-minded men who don't want unnecessary bloodshed. You have the guy who Balian kills his squire. He's Balian's equivalent, essentially. And then the guy that's telling him to attack Jerusalem is essentially the
Viking guy. I mean, not the Viking guy, but like the
barbarian. The barbaric Knights of the Templar guys equivalent. So you have all those represented in the Muslim forces too.
Yeah.
And I think if Ridley Scott had made more scenes about the Muslim side of things, I think he'd have portrayed it basically the same way he portrayed the Christian stuff too.
Yeah.
And I think because this is made for a Western audience, I think it's actually what it's trying to do is get people to see the equivalence of the sides and the nobility that exists on the other side as well, which I think is a noble effort.
It's accurate. It's fair. It's like not like.
I mean,
when you compare that to like Indiana Jones or like what Hollywood had done in the past, like this was, I think, a very necessary movie, like compared to what had come before it.
The Thuggee 100% existed though.
What?
So
I know, I know, but like not like them eating whatever. Yeah, like
they actually only strangle people. They didn't believe in spilling blood.
There you go. Yeah.
But anyway.
But like that's why that was a good thing that the movie did.
So, question for you guys: there were parts of this movie where I thought this could almost have been written by a Protestant Christian. Like if Martin Luther wrote a movie about the Crusades, what would be different about it than if Ridley Scott wrote it? So just for clarity, if anyone who didn't watch our episode about the Crusades before, Martin Luther, Christian reformer living in 1517, he didn't like the Crusades. He thought the Crusades weren't really done on God's behalf. They weren't actually a good thing, and it was essentially insulting the name of God to do them. And I'd say this movie agrees with that basic premise.
Sure.
It's not saying these Crusades were an inherently good thing, even though there are some noble people
in it, trying to do their best. Yeah.
So what would be different about the movie if it was written by Martin Luther or like a modern Protestant Christian with Martin Luther's worldview?
It'd suck.
Okay, let's imagine it was good though, right? It would.
In a film by Angel Studios.
God's Not Dead 6, The Third Crusade.
Right.
Oh man.
Salahuddin would be like on one knee saying the sinner's prayer at the end.
Right. I think that's
Literally.
what you just said kind of captures it, right? Like it certainly would have propped up Christianity more and taken as many dunks, right? Like, you know, the expression, you know, you got dunked on, you got posterized or whatever. It would have dunked on Catholicism and Islam just as much, right? Like, so I think, you know, Balian would be like a Christian, right? Like all would be a true Christian, you know, like a real Christian. So the secular human, this like heroism that's displayed throughout the movie would be done in Jesus's name, right? Like people doing things for Jesus, you know, and you're not doing things for Jesus. I'm doing things for Jesus. You know what I mean? And, you know, we're just going to fight off the infidels, and some of them might have good character, but there's a definite distinction between, you know, the Christian and essentially the opposing horde.
I think there's a lot of ways though.
It would have been. I think it would have been a lot more like the Battle of Helm's Deep, and the contrast between the orcs and the no, because Tolkien did that.
Yeah,
I mean, Tolkien took all of his ideas from, you know, the darkness of Sauron and all that other stuff from, you know, Babylon. Like he was opposed to that culture. Some people would say he was racist towards that culture too, but you know, I think that if you were trying to inject that, right, like how do I inject religion into this from like a Protestant standpoint? I think that's how it works out.
In Lord of the Rings, the Muslims are represented by the men of the East.
And then there's Kevin Sorbo. He's playing the lead role, not Orlando Bloom.
True to both of those points. I mean, true, like, in reality it would suck, but like also if we were pretending that it was like good, then like
I'm not
wait.
I don't want to dunk on the Christian studios either. You know what I mean? Like
they're getting better.
Angel Studios is casting some really good actors lately.
It's getting better.
It's getting better.
But you'd have Kevin Sorbo standing in the breach with a big sword and be like, "This doesn't belong to you or us. It belongs to the Jews."
There you go.
But what I was going to say is we could also look at it from a point of view of like, if a Christian, I don't know, whoever, if you'd written it or something, like, there might not be many differences between what a Christian would have written and what this movie was, because like if you notice in the movie, yes, it's like humanist hero, right? Like not going to get bogged down by the all the religious like nonsense, but he like upholds Christian values that come directly from the Bible, like oath keeping and like who you're loyal to and who you're, you know, and like not betraying like who you're loyal to, or like save the widows and the orphans and like protect the like innocent, like protect the ones that can't protect themselves, like all of these things that we made his character, like a lot of people thought he was a boring actor. That's like a other discussion. I didn't think he was a boring actor, but like as a character in this movie, the things that make him like make you root for him are that he like upholds those values for the sake of them being the right values, for the sake of it being the right thing. Hence brings me back to like he's gonna do the right thing and despite the outcome.
And to be fair, he's never directly referenced to as an atheist or an agnostic.
No.
It's his journey is not, I'm not sure if God exists or not. There's kind of one
He says
storyline.
God's not with me.
Yeah, exactly. He's
God's not
more
with me.
concerned, not that there is no God, but
Right.
that God has no interest in him
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
But in the arc of the movie, his Muslim bromance partner
Yeah.
actually says to him, if God is not with you, then how come all this happened to you?
All these good things happened.
And I like that. But also I can see how which is phenomenal writing. Like, the writing was really quite good. I mean, there was maybe 2 or 3 cringy lines. A lot of it was...
And all those other people God did not really care for. That's all the dead bodies around.
There's that. Well, what I was going to say is, there's that. And then what I was going to say is but that line that's artistically awesome, the societal equivalent is you don't have to acknowledge God to be good, and therefore God must be pleased with you. That's what he was really saying to Orlando. Was
that's a good point.
You say God, you're devoid of God, or God doesn't care about you, but look at all the good you've done, and that outweighs anything else, and therefore God is it's like the person I don't need God to be a good person, and therefore God is pleased with me. I don't need to be religious. That's what that is. But I do like from our perspective, it's a different biblical perspective. But
I think in this movie,
that's what's being said.
In this movie, and in some of the other Ridley Scott movies, now that I'm just kind of piecing it together, what those are. What he does is he creates a character that embodies something, right? So if you were to watch Alien, there's definitely a corporate presence on the spaceship trying to bring the alien back to Earth, right? Gladiator, right? Maximus embodies courage and honor, and what was the emperor, can't remember.
Commodus.
Yeah, Commodus embodies snivelly coward. You know what I mean? And this movie is the same, right? So, the king of Jerusalem embodies the weariness of it all. He's tired, he's sick, but he's still got some he's a part of the system. You know what I mean? Guy, right? The guy, right? Whatever. He embodies this is what the system produces, right? It produces people drunk on power and bent on violence. Even his dad, right? Another one. And Salahuddin is supposed to embody, and again he was a historical figure, so I can't speak as to how much or how little they painted him, but he's supposed to embody a nobility, right, within Islam. So if you're going to look at it, how does the movie address systems that exist at the time, and what is what is it trying to say to today's audiences? I think you're walking away with some themes they said it over and over again. Right action is better than religion. Mm-hmm. Right? Right action is better than religion. God looks at right action, not religion.
God wants to.
He doesn't like corrupt systems, and I'm on board with that. Right?
Obedience is better than sacrifice.
Oh, right. You know what I mean? If you were to look in the book of 1 Samuel, when it starts talking about Samuel the prophet being a child, there's the priesthood. And Eli's sons are corrupt, right? The high priest is and his sons are corrupt and doing bad things. And God puts an end to that whole line, right? In the Bible. Yeah. So, those are things we're not supposed to like. We're not supposed to like corrupt systems. We're supposed to be able to try and look at a system and say, when we look at what it produces, we can judge by it. You know what I mean?
Huh.
And the fact is, this is a historical movie and a grand narrative. And I think we're inevitably going to find a lot of truth in it. Because the fact is, the Crusades were the result of a corrupt system. Mm-hmm. And people want to defend the Crusades right now, but in Pope Urban's...
Who's defending the
Who
Crusades?
are these people?
What do you mean?
What corner of the dark web are you on?
Yeah. I haven't.
There's a good amount of this right now, and a lot of it comes from this idea that the sort of woke mentality is to criticize every aspect of our history, good and the bad. The reaction to the woke mentality ends up defending against things that should be rightly defended against, and other things that should not be defended against. So in Pope Urban II's admonition, basically what he accuses Europe of is, you keep fighting each other and you keep raiding each other, do something righteous with that and go fight and raid the Muslims instead.
Right.
And that's exactly what you see in this movie. You've got all these people who kind of hate each other and have their own rivalries that just happens to be directed at a different culture instead. And what it produces is a corrupt system which inevitably fails.
Right.
I think one character who I think probably has the biggest actual redemption arc in this movie is Eva Green's character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
she goes from being kind of calculating and cunning and, you know, cheating on her husband and all the other stuff.
Yes, and there's a really interesting point of view that she expresses in probably her like second or third scene in the movie.
I liked her acting in this one. Yeah.
Where she says it's not adultery, and even if it was, the rules are for them, they're not for us.
Yeah, that's maybe like the one also part where that part of Hickman, he's why would Orlando's character, because his whole thing was like he couldn't forget his wife, his dead wife. And he's like, oh yeah, you're right.
Well, again, maybe this is the Disney side of it, because he's a lot, when you meet him, he's a lot like Aladdin, right? He's just kind of like some normal dude, and then all of a sudden, it's like Aladdin meets Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Right?
But from a narrative perspective, you see that as a betrayal of who he thinks he should be. And eventually he does pull back from that and kind of distances himself from the whole situation. And he's seduced by her. Right? He's sort of taken in by her charm and her, you know,
her beauty
and her intelligence. But then later he sees it for what it really is when he's asked to kill her husband. And that's too far for him. So he loves her.
Even though she didn't ask. Oh, she did want him to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they all wanted him to do
it. They all want him to do it. Yeah. But he sees her for what she is, which is, again, this product of the system who is essentially corrupt. But so instead of joining in with her corruption and thinking, yeah, I'll go be above the rules with her. Mm-hmm. He says, no, I'm going to do what's right no matter what the cost is to myself.
Right.
Part of his oath.
Right.
And then basically invites her into that with him.
Right.
And that's how the story concludes, that she sees that she has been part of this corruption, mm-hmm. that she has partaken in evil.
Yes.
And she chooses to live a simple, humble life that's honest.
Right.
At the end of it.
She walks away from being a queen.
She walks away from being a queen.
Yeah, she just goes to being a wife of a blacksmith.
A nomad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved her acting, yeah.
I mean, she was good. I did think at one point, you know, she was didn't really have a choice, right? Like, of who she was going to marry. You know, her destiny's handed to her. I mean, she's a very, complex character, because she winds up killing her own son, who also, you know, has leprosy. You know, she finds out that he contracted leprosy, and he has numbness in his hands and feet. He can't feel anything, can't feel pain. So she kills him to spare him the pain of rotting away. And that's what kind of ignites the power struggle, the vacuum that ignites the power struggle that leads to her husband, you know, jumping on the throne.
They'd already said, oh, the kid's sick, weak, young, we're going to take over him. Anyway.
Well, yeah, they wanted that too. The other thing that they talk about is on both sides, I think they were very good at this, was talking about the people behind the throne who were pushing the agenda of the Caliphate and the Catholic Church, right? The church at the time. You know, there are definitely people who represent both sides, more so on the Christian side, like you were saying. You know, the priest that's left during the siege is Snively. You know, at one point he tells everybody, you know, convert to Islam, you know, when they get repent later, and that kind of thing. And he accuses, when Orlando Bloom is giving his big speech, he says, you know, Jews belong here, and Christians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, you know, you were born after this, like whatever started in the past is not on you, you know.
Yeah.
And then he just knights everybody, right? Like he makes everybody an honorable person. And the priest is like trying to, you know, save his, it gives off the idea he's trying to like save his neck, you know what I mean? He's trying to save his neck, but he's still like, he's the embodiment of a corrupt religious character, right? But then in the end, he's just in it for himself.
That's again one of these moments where I think, while Ridley Scott himself is a secular humanist, he's still downstream from the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah.
And essentially, while Ridley Scott himself is a humanist, the movie itself, as a story, essentially has Protestant sensibilities.
Wow.
So for example, in his last speech, where he says, the buildings are not holy, the stones are not holy, it's the people within the walls that are sacred.
Right.
That is a thoroughly Protestant approach to that.
Yeah.
Because a secular humanist approach cannot say they're sacred.
Right.
Now, you could have
not in honesty.
Not in honesty. Now, maybe he's written as an agnostic character who feels like he has to say this because he, you know, is trying to save as many lives as he can, right? You could read him that way.
Yeah.
You can watch this movie and you could read him as an atheist or an agnostic, or you could read him as somebody who believes there is some transcendent order and is trying the best he possibly can to fit into that. And I think the second reading just flows better with the movie.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you were going to get period accurate, I don't think that there's a lot of room for atheism or agnosticism in any of that. You know, at that time, in that place. I mean, you're in Jerusalem, for crying out loud. You know, like, you don't get sent to Jerusalem because you're like an atheist at the time. You know what I mean? There are definitely calculations and whatnot going on, but come on. Yeah. Anyway, if I wanted to try and dunk on the movie, there are definite things I could dunk on the movie on, you know. But I think overall, it was a good film. I recommend it. I like the themes it explores. The director's cut is better. It's a bit long in the tooth, but it's definitely better than what I saw years ago.
Yeah.
There's much better character development. It tells the story. I think what we were saying before too about how it like captured, right? Like it captured the idea of what the Crusades were. I think it's very good at that. The secular humanist themes, I mean, if we're being honest, you know, secular humanists will never say that the values, you know, that we kind of cling to as Christians
come from the Bible.
Right, like they won't say that their value, they won't compare their values, you know, to like Christian values in that sense. They won't say, well, you know, we have that in common,
or the
right?
origin,
right? Because one has to not exist for the other to not exist, you know, for the other to exist.
So I think this comes across as a secular humanist writer trying to tell a religious story.
Yeah.
And I think
did a good job.
He did a good job. But I think if Ridley Scott were to flesh out the sort of spiritual reality of what happens after the movie, I think you'd essentially have two Muslim characters in heaven along with like 4 Christian characters.
Right.
Yeah.
Essentially, so he's sort of drawing a circle and saying, hey, the righteous people are here. Mm-hmm. But the thing it doesn't deal with is sin, really.
Right.
So essentially,
and there's a ton of that, right? There's all kinds of sins going on, and there's justifications for sins. I mean, you said it earlier. She was like, "This isn't adultery." No, it's totally adultery.
Yeah, but that though, from a narrative perspective,
right,
is kind of dealt with.
Sure, I get it, but I mean, if we're looking at it in more black and white terms, yeah, I mean, that's what secular humanism does. It takes like these moral stances and tries to say, well, adultery's not a sin unless you say it's a sin. And the reason for you saying it's a sin is because God says it's a sin, so therefore it's invalid and I can do what I want, right? Like, because I don't believe in God or whatever, So I think it definitely tries to like wrap its secular humanistic narrative tentacles or whatever around, like what is truth, what is adhering to truth, what is morality.
Yeah, although I think in that instance, you're not supposed to hear that and be like, good point, woman. You're supposed to see an elite who thinks she's above the rules.
To your point.
No, you're right.
To your
you're
point.
Right. They did nail that.
We should review Silence eventually. To your point, probably after this one. He hasn't seen it, I don't think. But to your point, like, yes, this movie, and I don't think it's a film or any filmmaker's like job to like, extrapolate on the implications of like on a spiritual level when making a religious film per se. But yeah, like that would be the conclusion of this one is like, yeah, it's a couple Muslims, couple Christians, they're in heaven, they're the righteous, they're truly good. But religious films that then deal with like the logical conclusion of that, of like these events, Silence is a great one.
I think that
we
they're
should
saying,
just do one
I
on
don't
that.
think that they're saying that this group of characters is
No,
like,
it's not
belongs
making
in
that.
heaven.
It doesn't even talk about.
I
It's
know.
Kingdom
I
of
think
Heaven,
I think it's more like saying you don't need heaven. Look at the people who believe in all this stuff are like corrupt, and maybe you have like an inkling of religion in you, like, and all the main characters who are
an inkling,
have like nobility is more important than than religion. I think that's the movie does actually that really well. I
think Silence one-ups this movie.
Yeah, Silence
one-ups this. It's like takes this, minus like the awesome like battle scenes.
Also Liam Neeson.
Also Liam Neeson. Dude, we gotta talk to that guy. But then like one up. Yeah, we should just.
So my favorite, I think the most prominent sort of Protestant moment in this movie actually is when the king is dying and the priest says, "Now is the time to confess your sins," and the king says, "I'll confess them to God when I see him, not to you." Right.
Or when Liam Neeson is dying, right? He goes, "I'm sorry for all my sins except for one," and he's looking at his son, right? So who was conceived in, dubious circumstances, let's say. So, but that I think feeds what I was saying. You know what I mean? Like you don't need those things. The vibe is out there that you don't need those things, and even the Muslims have to deal with, this idea that they lay it at Salahuddin's feet that like you promised Jerusalem. You're not keeping your promise if you don't bring Jerusalem to us. You're not like conquering. You're not being strong enough, whatever. But they don't make it a moral issue. They don't make it a spiritual issue. No. They make it like a well, maybe a little bit. But.
Well, I think the Islam in this movie is generally very surface level.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think Ridley Scott would have had a much harder time telling a nuanced Islam story with that kind of depth.
Did he do Black Hawk Down?
Yeah.
I mean, the Muslims in that movie were not friendly.
Okay.
So that was right after 9/11 too.
Interesting thing to explore.
Film's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably concludes what we have to say on this. I think it was a great movie.
Yeah.
Explores a very interesting time in history, and what it's essentially trying to do is it's trying to make people in the West think about why they're fighting their view of the world and what actually it takes to bring about a peaceful world that isn't fueled by religious extremism.
Right.
And I think these are all things that are worth thinking about. So thank you for thinking about them with us, and thank you for listening to Christ and Caliphate. We'll be back next time.